So I want you to imagine for a second that every single thought you've had over the last 24 hours.
Oh, boy. That is a terrifying premise already.
Right. I mean, all the petty grievances, the flashes of jealousy, those really dark, fleeting impulses you wouldn't even admit to your closest friend.
Yeah, the quiet resentments we all kind of harbor.
Exactly. Imagine if all of that was suddenly just, extracted from your brain
Yeah.
and broadcast on a massive high-definition screen right in the middle of Times Square.
Just for everyone to see.
Yeah. Everyone you love, everyone you respect, just standing there watching the completely unfiltered reality of your internal life.
The immediate reaction there, for anyone with even a slightly functioning conscience, is just sheer suffocating panic.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
The instinct is to hide. And, when you strip away all the societal noise, all the carefully curated versions of ourselves we put on social media, we arrive at this really profound, terrifying dilemma of human existence.
We really do.
Because we are looking at this vast, uncrossable gulf between a perfectly holy, all-seeing God and, well, us. Deeply flawed, fallen, weak people.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate diagnostic crisis of the human condition.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking, by the way. I am so thrilled you are joining us for this deep dive today, because our mission is to look directly into that terrifying gulf and discover how it has actually been permanently bridged.
And what's amazing is the material we are unpacking today addresses this crisis not with philosophical platitudes. It anchors us in a single revolutionary passage of Scripture.
Which is Hebrews chapter 4, right? Verses 14 through 16.
Exactly. And to understand the magnitude of this text, we really have to look deeply into the dual nature of Christ.
So his absolute uncreated deity and his true experiential humanity.
Right. Grasping his role as our high priest, it really dismantles the two greatest enemies of the human soul.
Which are?
Well, the crushing weight of legalism on one side and paralyzing grip of spiritual despair on the other.
Yeah, and we are dedicating an entire deep dive to just 3 verses because of the sheer staggering magnitude of what they offer you as a listener.
It's that dense.
It really is. I mean, think about how the modern world tries to soothe human misery, anxiety, and guilt. You walk into any bookstore and the self-help aisle is it's overflowing with what we might call therapeutic moralism.
Oh, absolutely. It's all pragmatic life hacks, mindfulness apps.
Yeah, and this constant repetitive drumbeat of, you are enough just the way you are.
Which, sounds nice on a coffee mug.
Right. But when the bottom actually falls out of your life, when you are hit with a devastating medical diagnosis or a relationship shatters.
Or when you're just pinned down by the crushing weight of your own moral failures.
Exactly. Those shallow balms just evaporate immediately. They do absolutely nothing to heal a wounded conscience.
No, they don't.
But this text in Hebrews offers something infinitely better. It offers a cosmic king who possesses an inconceivably tender heart.
But, before we can appreciate the soaring theology of that cosmic king, we really have to get our boots on the ground.
Okay, set the stage for us.
We have to look at the dirt and the grit of the original audience. Because theology doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right, we can't treat this like some abstract academic theory discussed in an ivory tower.
No, not at all. We are talking about real, terrified people living in the mid-60s AD, facing an absolute existential crisis.
So let's paint that picture. We are in the mid-60s AD, which is basically a powder keg of a time.
Very much so. It's just a few years prior to the catastrophic destruction of the Jerusalem temple by the Roman legions in 70 AD.
And the audience receiving this letter consists of Jewish Christians.
Yeah.
Often referred to as Hebrew Christians.
Yes, and their daily reality was brutal. We aren't just talking about people disagreeing with them on social media.
No, we were talking about severe, systemic, social, economic, and religious persecution.
The historical context reveals that these believers were being systematically stripped of their property. They were being thrown into prison.
Wow.
Yeah, and to be a Jewish convert to Christianity in this era meant being completely ostracized from your family and your cultural heritage.
And in a first-century collectivist society, your identity, your livelihood, your safety, all of that was entirely bound up in your community, right?
Exactly. If you were cast out of the synagogue, you couldn't trade in the marketplace. Your family would literally hold a funeral for you.
Wait, really? A literal funeral?
Yes, declaring you totally dead to them. You were financially ruined and just socially erased.
So the temptation they were facing wasn't just, hey, maybe I'll stop going to church and sleep in on Sundays.
Oh, no. The temptation was to apostatize completely, to publicly renounce Christ.
And retreat back into the highly visible, socially accepted, and crucially legally protected framework of Old Covenant Judaism under the Roman Empire.
Because Judaism was a recognized, protected religion by Rome. Christianity was not.
Okay, let's unpack this. I always try to imagine this in modern terms. It would be like, um, imagine leaving a massive, secure, globally respected corporation.
With incredible benefits and a towering glass headquarters.
Exactly. And you leave all that to join a tiny, fragile startup that operates out of a damp garage. And this startup is actively being sued, mocked, and investigated by everyone in your industry.
That's a great analogy, because Judaism had the massive headquarters. It had centuries of legacy. It had the majestic temple on Mount Zion.
And we cannot overstate the psychological dominance of that temple, right?
Absolutely not. Herod's temple was one of the architectural marvels of the ancient world. It was constructed of these massive white marble stones, some weighing hundreds of tons.
I read that the front was covered in heavy gold plates.
Yes, so that when the sun rose, it was literally blinding to look at. And inside, you had the burning incense, the elaborate, bloody drama of the daily morning and evening sacrifices.
The choirs of Levites singing the Psalms.
Exactly. And the high priest walking around in vestments woven with gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, wearing a breastplate of precious stones.
It was tangible. It was total sensory overload. It felt undeniably real.
And then you look at Christianity in the 60s AD.
Right. To the undiscerning eye of a first-century neighbor, Christianity seemed completely stripped of everything that made religion real.
Yeah, if you're a young Jewish convert, your non-believing friends and family are undoubtedly mocking you. They are saying, look at what you left.
You left the glorious temple for a dead man. You meet in secret in some guy's cramped living room.
You don't have an altar, you don't have a priesthood, you don't have incense or sacrifices.
You have an invisible savior who was stripped naked, beaten, and crucified like a common, treasonous criminal outside the city gates.
The psychological pressure to just go back to the tangible comfort of Judaism must have been nearly unbearable.
And that unbearable pressure is the exact catalyst for the book of Hebrews, isn't it?
It is. The author is writing to aggressively prove to these exhausted, battered believers that they haven't lost a high priest at all.
In fact, he argues that the stunning architecture of the temple, the gold, the incense, the animal sacrifices, all of those were merely two-dimensional shadows.
Right. They were pointers. And those shadows have finally given way to the ultimate three-dimensional reality. They haven't lost the priesthood. They finally have the true and ultimate high priest.
But, and this is crucial to the structure of the argument, to fully grasp the overwhelming comfort of that provision, the author forces them to first feel the absolute terror of what precedes it.
Yes, this is where the setup becomes incredibly intense. The historical and societal pressure was immense, but that pressure is suddenly compounded by a terrifying spiritual reality introduced just 2 verses earlier.
Right, before we get to the immense comfort of Hebrews 4.14, we have to walk through the fire of Hebrews 4.12 and 13.
Yeah, and in verse 12, the author describes the Word of God as a living, active, two-edged sword.
And the Greek word used there for sword is machara, right?
Exactly, machera. And this wasn't, a large, cumbersome broadsword used for hacking. The machera was the deadly, short Roman sword used by soldiers in close quarters combat for precise, deep piercing.
So it's a very specific surgical weapon.
Very. The text says this surgical instrument pierces to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and of marrow, discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart.
It is a terrifying autopsy of the living soul. It dissects you down to your microscopic motives.
It really does. And then verse 13 delivers the absolute crushing blow. It says, "And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account."
That phrasing is deeply unsettling.
It is. The word translated as exposed is the Greek verb trekalizo.
Trekalizo.
Yeah, and it has a few historical usages, all of which are deeply vulnerable. For instance, it was used in wrestling to describe a grappler grabbing his opponent by the throat, bending his neck back, and rendering him completely helpless.
Oh, wow.
It was also used in the sacrificial system, describing how an animal's head was pulled back by the priest to expose the neck for the sacrificial knife.
That's a visceral image.
And maybe most relevantly, it was used in Roman executions. A criminal would have a dagger tied under their chin so they couldn't bow their head in shame. They were forced to look their judges in the eye as their sentence was read.
That is horrifying. But whichever image the author intended, the meaning is identical, right? Absolute helpless vulnerability. You cannot hide. You cannot look away.
Exactly.
I struggle with this concept because it goes against every modern instinct we have. I mean, we spend our entire lives managing our image, rationalizing our bad behavior, building
Oh,
defenses.
constant TR for ourselves.
Right. But if we stop our exploration right here at verse 13, this text offers nothing but pure, unadulterated despair.
Yes, it does.
Think about the implications. If God is an all-seeing, all-consuming fire of perfect holiness, and every dark thought, every selfish manipulation, every hidden corruption in my heart is naked and exposed before him, with my neck bent back, I mean, how does a morally bankrupt sinner survive that?
You can't. You can't out-argue a God who sees the very bottom of your soul. You can't hire a clever lawyer.
You are left utterly undone.
Utterly undone. And that is why the literary and structural pivot at this exact moment in the text is a stroke of divine brilliance.
Because if the passage ended at verse 13, the sinner is left trembling before the blinding light of divine holiness without any covering. We would be crushed.
But verse 14 provides the immediate monumental remedy. The author transitions instantaneously from the terror of the exposing sword to the cosmic exaltation of the high priest.
It's as if a massive hurricane has just blown the roof off your house, exposing the total ruin inside to the torrential rain. And in the very next second, an impenetrable, indestructible fortress drops directly over you.
That is a very fitting image. And this structural choice prevents two fatal errors that listeners often make.
What are they?
First, the immediate transition prevents the sheer terror of verse 13 from driving us to hopeless, paralyzing despair. God does not expose us just to humiliate us. He exposes our disease so we will actively accept the cure.
Right.
But secondly, it prevents the grace offered later in verse 16 from being treated as cheap, casual grace.
Yeah, because when you understand verse 13, you realize you aren't being offered a casual favor from a buddy. You are being rescued from the omniscient, righteous judgment of the creator of the universe.
Exactly. The sword does its necessary painful work of destroying our self-righteousness so that we realize our utter, desperate need for the priest.
So we arrive at verse 14, where the rescue operation really begins. And what strikes me is that the author doesn't start by talking about our feelings.
No, he does.
He doesn't offer coping mechanisms or psychological frameworks. He starts by dropping a massive, objective, cosmic reality onto the table. Verse 14 says, "Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession."
The grammar here is immensely comforting. The verse begins with a present active participle in the Greek, ekontos, which translates to having or since we possess.
Since we possess, present tense.
Present tense. The author is looking at these battered, persecuted, exhausted Christians who feel like they have lost everything. Their homes, their families, their status, their temple. And he says, you possess something right now.
You don't merely hope for a high priest in the distant future.
Right. And you don't need to mourn the loss of the earthly priest in Jerusalem. You currently actively possess the ultimate priest.
And he amplifies the title. He calls him a great high priest, Archieria Megan.
Yes.
The term for high priest already has the prefix arch, meaning chief or highest, right?
That's right.
So to add the adjective Megan, meaning great, it creates this linguistic explosion. It's a superlative tautology. No earthly Aaronite priest in the entire 1,500-year history of Israel was ever called a great high priest.
No, Aaron wasn't called great. Caiaphas wasn't great. This is an intentional, massive elevation of Jesus above the entire Levitical system.
And to understand the weight of that elevation, we really have to look closely at how the Old Covenant system functioned, specifically on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur.
Yeah, this was the holiest day of the year in Judaism. And under the old system, the earthly high priest was just a sinful man.
Right, he was just a guy.
Exactly. Before he could do anything for the people, he had to wash his own body and offer a bull as a sin, offering to atone for his own failures and the failures of his household. He was terrified.
I mean, historical tradition tells us they would tie a rope around his ankle, right?
Yes, they would tie a rope around his ankle and sew bells onto the hem of his garment so that if he entered the presence of God improperly and was struck dead, they could hear the bells stop ringing and drag his corpse out because no one else was allowed to go in.
The anxiety of that entire system is just palpable. You are relying on a flawed, sweating, trembling man to represent you before God.
And his access was severely restricted. He could only enter the Holy of Holies once a year. He passed through a physical, heavy fabric veil into a dark, small, earthly tent or room.
Carrying the blood of an animal, a goat, that could never actually take away human sin, but only temporarily cover it as a shadow of what was to come.
Yeah. He would frantically sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat and get out as fast as he could.
But then look at the contrast with verse 14. Jesus, our great high priest, doesn't pass through a fabric veil in a stone building in the Middle East. The text says he has passed through the heavens.
The Greek phrase, dilelitatatatu sarnes, indicates a completed, triumphant passage with permanent, eternal results.
He passed through the physical, stellar heavens into the uncreated, immediate presence of God the Father. And he didn't enter with the blood of bulls and goats.
No, he entered by his own perfectly righteous blood, having secured eternal redemption once and for all. He didn't run in and run out in fear. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high.
And the author then explicitly identifies exactly who this great high priest is, Jesus, the Son of God. He intentionally unites these two titles to communicate a foundational theological reality.
Jesus is his earthly human name. It grounds him in historical bodily reality. This highlights the man who was born in Bethlehem, who worked with his hands, who grew tired, who wept, who bled, and who suffocated on a Roman cross.
But the title Son of God asserts his eternal, uncreated, absolute deity. I want to pause here because this is where a lot of people, myself included, can get conceptually tangled.
How so?
Well, how can an eternal, invisible, omnipotent spirit truly represent fragile, physical human beings? It feels like there's a disconnect. We are talking about two completely different categories of existence.
That is the crucial question of representation. In theology, the union of these two titles is known as the hypostatic union. It is the absolute bedrock of Orthodox Christian faith. It means that in the one singular person of Jesus Christ, there are two distinct natures, true humanity and true deity, perfectly united without confusion, without change, without division, and without separation.
Okay, I think I need an analogy for that.
Sure, think of a massive chasm between two cliffs. If you want to build a bridge across that chasm, the bridge is entirely useless if it only touches one side. It has to firmly anchor into the rock on both sides to serve as a crossing.
Oh, I see. So if Jesus is only God, he cannot represent us as a human substitute. But if he is only a man, his sacrifice has no infinite, eternal value to satisfy the wrath of an infinite God.
Precisely. Because he is truly man, he can act as our perfect representative and substitute. He can die. But because he is truly God, his life and his sacrifice possess infinite eternal worth.
And the author is leveraging this profound, staggering theological reality to fuel a very practical, gritty command for these suffering believers.
Yes. Because we have this specific priest, one whose work is infinitely effective and permanently finished, we are commanded to hold fast our confession.
That reframes everything about endurance for me. Because so often when we face intense suffering or moral failure, we think holding fast means white-knuckling it.
Yeah, just trying harder.
Right. We look inside ourselves to try and find some hidden reservoir of willpower or spiritual grit.
But the author is saying that the foundation of your endurance isn't your own strength. It's the objective reality of who Jesus is and where he is located.
When you are losing your job because of your ethics or your friends are abandoning you, you don't hold fast by looking within. You hold fast by looking outside of yourself, up to the cosmic reality that your representative is currently seated in the place of ultimate authority in the universe.
Your security is firmly anchored in heaven, impervious to the shifting, chaotic circumstances on earth.
However, this magnificent cosmic exaltation raises an incredibly urgent pastoral question. A cosmic, exalted divine king who has passed through the stellar heavens and sits in unapproachable light sounds glorious, but he also sounds terrifyingly distant.
It's the paradox of his greatness.
Yeah, if he is that high, that holy, and that triumphant, how can this transcendent God possibly understand my mundane exhaustion? How can he understand chronic physical pain or the gnawing daily anxiety about paying the bills or the deep depression that makes it hard to even get out of bed?
And that's exactly what the original audience was feeling.
Right. And I struggle with that, though, because if he never sinned, he's kind of like a billionaire telling a bankrupt guy he understands financial stress.
Right.
Or perfectly healthy athlete telling someone with chronic illness that they get it. It just doesn't track for our modern sensibilities. If he's so great, isn't he fundamentally out of touch with the dirt and grime of my daily existence?
And that tension brings us directly into the astonishing, breathtaking comfort of verse 15.
Which says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin."
The grammatical construction the author uses here is a masterpiece of emphasis. He uses a literary device called litotes, which is the intentional use of a double negative to violently affirm a positive reality.
Oh, like saying, I am not unaware of the problem.
Exactly. Notice he doesn't just say he sympathizes with our weaknesses. He says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize. He anticipates the exact objection you just raised. He knows the suffering believer will naturally assume God is distant and unfeeling, so he violently dismantles that negative assumption. He completely rules out even the possibility that Christ could be indifferent, callous, or out of touch with your pain.
And the historical context makes this even more radical.
Mhm.
If you look at the prevalent philosophical ideal of the Greco-Roman world in the first century, especially among the Stoics,
Think of philosophers like Seneca or Epictetus.
right, the ultimate goal of life, and especially the ultimate attribute of deity, was this concept of apatheia.
Yes, which is where we get the English word apathy, though it meant something slightly different in their context.
How
Well, for the Stoics, the world was a brutal, chaotic place, and the only way to survive it was to achieve emotional deadness. They believed that if a god could feel sadness, grief, or pain in response to human affairs, it meant that God could be manipulated or affected by outside forces.
Yeah, and to be affected by outside forces meant you were vulnerable, and vulnerability was the ultimate weakness.
Exactly. Therefore, a truly supreme being must exist in a state of absolute, unshakable apatheia, total detachment. The pagan gods did not weep with you.
But the author of Hebrews takes a sledgehammer to that entire philosophical paradigm. The God of the Bible, incarnate in Jesus Christ, does not possess apatheia. He possesses sympathia.
The exalted Lord of the cosmos isn't looking down on us with cold, detached analysis. He possesses an active, burning capacity to suffer alongside us, to have genuine fellow feeling.
We have a king who knows the bitter, hollow pangs of extreme hunger from fasting in the wilderness. He knows the devastating psychological agony being betrayed by one of his closest friends for pocket change.
He knows the feeling of standing at a graveside and weeping uncontrollably over the death of a loved one.
He knows exactly what it feels like to have the entire world, both the religious establishment and the political empire, turn entirely against him.
Which brings us back to the most difficult phrase in the verse, the one you brought up earlier as a point of struggle. He was tested in every respect as we are, yet without sin.
Yeah, this is the part that trips people up. The natural human intuition argues that shared failure is what creates true sympathy. We think that unless Jesus actually gave in to sin, he can't really understand the crushing weight of our temptations.
But the theological reality is that his sinlessness actually intensifies his sympathy and his understanding of temptation to a degree we cannot even fathom.
Let me push that analogy further because I want to make sure this completely clicks. How does not sinning make him understand temptation better than someone who does? It still sounds counterintuitive.
We need to analyze the actual mechanics of how temptation operates. Temptation is essentially an external pressure applied to the soul, designed to break our obedience to God.
Okay, pressure.
Because we are fallen humans with corrupt, sinful natures, we actually give way to temptation relatively early in the process. We bow to the pressure. And here is the key. The exact moment we yield to the temptation and commit the sin, the pressure of the temptation ceases. We experience a false, temporary relief.
We basically tap out of the fight.
Yeah.
We take the easy way out to stop the pain of resisting.
Exactly. Think of temptation like holding a massive barbell over your head. As the weight gets heavier, your muscles burn, your arms shake, and the pain becomes unbearable. Fallen humans eventually drop the barbell. We sin.
So because we drop the barbell, we never actually feel the maximum ultimate weight of it.
Right, but because Jesus perfectly holy and never yielded, he bore the absolute climax, the maximum agonizing force of every single temptation. He never dropped the barbell.
Wow.
He felt the full, unbroken fury of Satan's assaults and the world's crushing pressure right up to the very end, unto the point of sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane.
That is a phenomenal way to understand it. There's an old analogy that only the man who walks completely against the wind knows how hard the storm is truly blowing.
That's perfect, yeah.
Because the person who lies down and surrenders to the wind immediately doesn't actually feel the full force of the gale. Because Christ resisted unto blood, his understanding of temptation's violent power is infinitely deeper, infinitely more profound than that of any sinner who merely gave in when it got difficult.
Furthermore, this absolute qualification, chusers hamartias, without sin or apart from sin, establishes a critical, non-negotiable boundary regarding the nature of his sympathy.
Okay, what is that boundary?
His sympathy is boundless, but it is not a blanket endorsement of our condition.
So we have to clearly differentiate here between weakness and rebellion. The Greek word for weakness in verse 15 is asthenia.
Yes, it refers to frailty, physical pain, mortality, grief, fatigue, and our general susceptibility to suffering in a fallen world. Jesus experienced all of that.
But he did not experience internal depravity. His temptations were entirely external. He was assaulted by Satan, he felt the brutal pressures of the world, and he experienced bodily weakness. But he never had internal, corrupt, evil desires bubbling up from within his own heart.
Because his nature was perfectly, immaculately holy. And this distinction is absolutely vital for our salvation.
Why is that?
A priest who shares our internal guilt and our sinful nature might be able to offer us a certain type of miserable companionship. If you are locked in a prison cell, another guilty inmate can sit next to you on the bench and say, "Yeah, I messed up too. The guards are mean. This place is awful."
That feels nice for about 5 minutes.
Right. But a fellow cellmate cannot offer you rescue. A cellmate doesn't have the keys to open the iron door.
A drowning man doesn't need a lifeguard who also can't swim to jump in and drown next to him in solidarity. He needs a lifeguard who is strong enough to battle the current and pull him out.
That is the perfect illustration. Christ does not sympathize with us merely to affirm us in our chosen paths of rebellion. He doesn't coddle evil or pat us on the back and say, "Don't worry about the sin, nobody's perfect."
He sympathizes with our weakness in order to bear our guilt substitutionally on the cross.
He is infinitely gentle towards sinners precisely because he is perfectly holy enough to actually rescue them from the wrath of God. His sinlessness is not a barrier to his compassion. His sinlessness is the very engine that makes his compassion effective for our salvation.
This presents such a massive, irreconcilable contrast to the modern secular worldview.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a culture that increasingly defines compassion and love as unconditional affirmation.
Right. If you really love me, you validate everything I do.
Exactly. The world dictates that if you love me, you will affirm every internal desire I have and validate every choice I make, regardless of whether it is destructive or not. But biblical, true rescue requires holiness.
The world says that strength requires maintaining distance from weakness. Meanwhile, our own guilty consciences whisper to us, "God is angry with you. You better stay far away from him until you clean up your act, fix your life, and become presentable."
And the gospel of Jesus Christ just completely incinerates that script. The gospel says, he is perfectly holy, you are fundamentally broken. But because he suffered for you and bore your penalty, his holiness is no longer your executioner. His holiness is now your impenetrable sanctuary.
Which perfectly and seamlessly sets up the magnificent climax of this passage.
Right, because we have this flawless, deeply sympathetic, and cosmically exalted high priest, what are we actually commanded to do? Verse 16 changes everything from passive theological observation to aggressive, confident action. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need.
The author is using heavy cultic Levitical language here. The Greek verb translated draw near is prosirshmetha. Yes. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, this was technical language used almost exclusively for the priests approaching God in the tabernacle.
And as we discussed earlier, they did it with fear, trembling, and the very real threat of sudden death if they made a mistake.
But now, because of the finished work of Jesus, the entire congregation, every single believer, regardless of their status, is commanded to approach. And notice the radical shift in the manner of the approach. We are told to come with confidence.
And the Greek word translated as confidence is parrhesia. It is a rich, politically charged word. It essentially means boldness, freedom of speech, or absolute frankness.
Right. In the ancient world, you did not approach a Roman emperor or a Persian king with parrhesia.
No. Think of the story of Esther in the Old Testament. You approached the king trembling, hoping he would extend the golden scepter so you wouldn't be immediately executed. You certainly didn't speak your mind freely.
But the author says that because of Jesus, you can approach God the Father with the absolute frankness and unfiltered honesty of a beloved child running into their father's study.
You don't have to grovel. You don't have to hide behind polite, sanitized, hypocritical religious language. You can bring your mess, your anger, your fear, and your failures directly to him because your great high priest has already permanently secured your welcome.
And look at what we are approaching, the throne of grace.
Yeah.
If we pause and think about it objectively, a divine throne is naturally a seat of absolute sovereignty, terrifying authority, and perfect justice. It is the place where sentences are handed down.
But because the blood of the perfect substitute, Jesus Christ, has been sprinkled on it, this seat of judgment has been fundamentally transformed into a throne of charis, unmerited, sovereign, magnificent favor.
The author brilliantly breaks down the dual purpose of our drawing near. When we storm this throne, we are coming to receive two very specific, distinct provisions. First, we come to receive mercy, the Greek word ilios.
And mercy specifically addresses our past, doesn't it?
Yes, it addresses our guilt, our failure, and the miserable, wretched condition that our sin has left us in. When we fall, we need pardon. We need the withholding of the punishment we actually deserve.
But we don't just need pardon for yesterday's failures. We need power for today's trials. So second, we come to find grace, Charis.
Grace is the impartation of divine strength, unmerited favor, and supernatural endurance for the specific trial or temptation we are currently facing.
Because as believers, we often come to the throne needing both simultaneously. We are simultaneously the guilty sinner needing mercy and the exhausted sufferer needing grace.
And the text provides an incredibly vivid picture of how this provision arrives. It says we find grace for timely help. The Greek phrase is eucharin boethian.
The etymology of that phrase is stunning. Eucharina means well-timed, seasonable, or at the exact right moment.
But boethian is a compound word made of two parts. Bu, which means a loud cry, and the she, which means to run.
So it literally depicts a scenario where someone hears a desperate, screaming cry for help, and they immediately drop everything and run to render assistance.
Yes, exactly.
Just, wow. Let that image sink in for a second.
Mm-hmm.
When you draw near to the throne in your darkest moment, God is not sitting there, passively rolling. His eyes reluctantly dispensing tiny, measured drops of favor on a 6-week bureaucratic delay.
He hears your cry, and he is running to your assistance at the exact, providentially ordained right moment.
It is help that arrives right when the soul is at the absolute breaking point, not a single second too late.
This theology is not meant to stay trapped in the first century. It moves directly from the heavenly sanctuary into the listener's daily life. And it is designed to completely dismantle the spiritual counterfeits, theological errors, and psychological traps that we face today.
Let's look at how this passage directly applies to some of the most common struggles believers experience. Let's start with the most pervasive one, legalism. Because legalism is essentially the default setting of the human heart.
It is. Legalism is the insidious, constant whisper of Satan telling the suffering or failing believer that God is hostile. It argues that because you have sinned or because your faith feels weak today, you must retreat into the shadows.
You must earn your way back into God's good graces. You have to put together a string of 3 or 4 good days before you have the right to pray again.
But Hebrews 4 absolutely shatters this demonic logic. It commands us to draw near because we are in desperate need, not because we have conquered our need.
The 17th century Puritan theologian John Owen wrote extensively on this specific passage, and his context gives his words incredible weight. I mean, Owen lived through Civil War, the Plague, the Great Fire of London, and the heartbreaking deaths of 10 of his 11 children.
He knew suffering and spiritual exhaustion intimately.
Yeah. And regarding this text, Owen said something profound. He said, staying away from prayer because you are conscious of your weakness is like refusing to visit the physician because you are sick.
That completely flips our natural logic.
Right. If you are bleeding heavily from a wound, you don't wait at home to heal before going to the emergency room. You go to the ER, specifically because you are bleeding and cannot heal yourself. To stay away from the throne of grace because you feel sinful is spiritual suicide.
Exactly. The text also serves as a powerful refutation of theological systems that breed chronic instability and anxiety. For instance, in historical debates surrounding systems like Arminianism, which emerged from the Remonstrance in the 17th century, there is a heavy emphasis on human free will and the believer's continuous effort to maintain their own salvation.
So if your ultimate endurance relies on the strength of your own grip on Christ, you will live in perpetual terror of letting go. Think of it like dangling over a cliff, holding onto a rope with your bare, sweaty hands. Eventually, your muscles will fail.
But this passage anchors our endurance entirely differently. Our great high priest has passed through the heavens. We hold fast to our confession, not because our grip is so strong, but because he holds us fast. His intercession is invincible.
You aren't just holding a rope, you are secured in a divine harness.
And we can also apply this to the pervasive pragmatism we see in the modern church. There is this overwhelming idea that to survive in a hostile post-Christian culture, the church needs to rely on corporate marketing, entertainment, secular management theories, or slick organizational strategies.
We try to manufacture relevance. But Hebrews strips all of that away. The author tells a persecuted dying church that their power and their survival comes solely from drawing near to the throne of grace. It's not about human cleverness or cultural leverage. It's about receiving divine, seasonable help from the living Christ.
Furthermore, we see how this text addresses secular therapeutic ideologies. There are many modern sociological frameworks that attempt to reduce human misery entirely to sociopolitical structures.
They argue that humanity's fundamental problem is simply external systems of power, economics, or oppressive social dynamics. Therefore, they claim the solution is purely political or structural revolution.
Now, the author of Hebrews is writing to people who are genuinely brutally oppressed by systemic, unjust political and religious power. But notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't point them to a political revolution. He doesn't tell them to organize a protest against Nero or the Sanhedrin.
Right. He identifies their deepest, most existential need as being reconciled to a perfectly holy God. He points them to the sinless sacrifice and the tender, experiential sympathy of Jesus Christ as the ultimate, eternal remedy for human suffering and alienation.
And to be clear, we are imparting the theological argument of the text here. Biblical Christianity locates the root of the human dilemma in our internal sin and our alienation from the Creator, not merely in our external social dynamics.
And therefore, the only viable solution is a divine mediator who can bridge that infinite gap.
The intended effect of all this soaring theology on the original audience and on you, the listener, today is incredibly concrete habitual action.
The exhortation is corporate and private. Let us draw near. It means gathering with the saints for worship when you don't feel like it. It means falling on your knees in private prayer when you are overwhelmed with shame.
You do not wait for an ideal, mystical feeling of spiritual closeness. You approach the throne aggressively based entirely on the objective, unchangeable historical reality of the priest who sits upon it.
Your confidence is in his identity, his righteousness, and his shed blood, never in the quality, the fervency, or the eloquence of your own prayer.
So bringing all of this immense truth together, just look at the massive redemptive journey this text has taken us on.
We started in the terrifying depths of verse 13, facing the absolute terror of God's omniscient, exposing sword, knowing that every dark, hidden secret of our hearts is laid bare and our necks are exposed before a holy judge.
But we were not left there to be destroyed. We moved instantly to the cosmic exaltation of Jesus, the Son of God, who tore through the physical heavens to represent us perfectly.
We saw his intimate experiential sympathy, forged in the brutal fires of human suffering and maximum unbroken temptation, without ever once giving in to sin.
And all of that massive theology leads directly to this beautiful, wide-open invitation to boldly storm the throne of grace, where we will absolutely find mercy for our failures and running, seasonable help for our exhaustion.
It truly is the ultimate comprehensive answer to the weary human soul. But before we close today, there is one final provocative thought regarding the resurrection that I want to leave you, the listener, to deeply mull over.
It has to do with the physical reality of the ascended Christ, and it changes everything about how we view our own pain.
This is one of my favorite implications of the text. Lay it out for us.
When Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, he did not shed his human body. He did not revert to a purely spiritual state, leaving his humanity behind in the tomb. He rose bodily.
And when he ascended through the stellar heavens to take his seat on that throne of grace, he retained something profoundly significant for all of eternity: his wounds.
The gruesome scars of his crucifixion, the holes in his hands, his feet, and his side remain permanently on his glorified, resurrected body in heaven.
The enthroned, omnipotent Lord of the cosmos is eternally the exact same one who suffered and bled on the dirt of this earth.
So here is the question to take with you into your week. How does viewing the King of the universe as eternally bearing the physical scars of human suffering change the way you view your own permanent emotional, psychological, or physical scars today?
That is breathtaking. He didn't erase the evidence of the pain. He glorified it. He integrated it into his eternal identity. That completely transforms how I view my own brokenness.
It means our scars, the things we try so desperately to hide from the world, aren't just shameful reminders of our trauma or our failures.
In Christ, those scars become actual points of intimate connection with the King of the universe.
He knows the pain, and he bears the marks to prove it. You are never suffering in isolation.
That is a staggering, beautiful thought to end on. Remember, you don't have to try harder from a distance. You don't have to clean yourself up before you cry out. You are invited right now to come near through the finished work of Christ. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Hold fast to your confession, and whatever storm you're facing today, draw near to the throne. We'll catch you next time on Reformed Thinking.